The expansive river networks of the Amazon basin offer a window into a different social reality. For thousands of years, horticultural tribes lived here without ever building a centralized state or a ruling elite. If a village grew too crowded, a group simply moved further down the river, using the unbounded geography to maintain their independence. Curious, contrast that with the Indus Valley. 5,000 years ago, the residents of Mohenjo-Daro were living in a highly structured grid city with monumental planning. The central mystery remains: why did some human populations construct these massive, stratified states, while others spent millennia roaming free? Ancient theorists looked to nature for the answer. In the 7th century BC, the Chinese chancellor Guanzong argued that the twisting, swift currents of local rivers directly shaped the warlike temperament of the people living near them. In Greece, Hippocrates claimed the harsh, variable seasons of the north bred resilient populations that were naturally difficult to govern. Classical philosophers viewed the state as a rational, deliberate invention. Aristotle argued that humans are political animals by nature and that we built the city-state as a necessary framework to achieve justice and a good life. However, for most of our history, humans lived in egalitarian villages. Submitting to a central authority, paying taxes, obeying laws, and joining organized militaries represented a radical departure from the way our ancestors survived for hundreds of thousands of years. The state emerged as a response to the physical constraints of the landscape. Our ancestors weren't making a philosophical choice. They were surviving the brutal math of the dirt, water, and climate beneath their feet. Stretching 8,000 kilometers across Eurasia is the steppe, a vast, arid grassland. In the 14th century, the scholar Ibn Khaldun observed that these specific environmental conditions dictated how people governed themselves. He identified asabiya, or social solidarity, as the engine of state formation. In a landscape where resources are scarce, survival depends on forming intense, unbreakable tribal bonds. Because the steppe is too arid for intensive farming, these populations adopted a mobile, pastoral lifestyle. To survive the exposure of the open plains, every member of the tribe had to be a skilled rider and a hunter. This environment created hardened, militaristic societies. These nomads functioned as the ultimate predators, eventually conquering the luxury-softened sedentary states that bordered the plains. Those sedentary states faced a different kind of environmental coercion. In the 20th century, Carl Wittfogel theorized that the world's first autocratic empires were actually water monopolies. In arid floodplains like Mesopotamia, survival depended entirely on controlling unpredictable rivers. Agriculture only worked if the population could build and maintain massive irrigation networks to manage the water supply. Coordinating the labor for these projects required central planning. The first specialized bureaucracies grew directly out of the physical requirement to build and measure these irrigation systems. Once established, this administrative network inevitably consolidates. The system required to control the river eventually becomes a system that grants a single despot total control over the population. The physical necessity of managing water networks created a political structure that could manage and dominate human beings. But why would early farmers stay and be oppressed instead of simply fleeing? Robert Carnero's circumscription theory suggests they were trapped by geography. In the Nile, productive land is bounded by impassable sand dunes. As population grew, trapped farmers could not migrate to escape rising authority without starving. The Andes provide a similar geographic cage. High-yield agriculture is confined to deep mountain valleys, locked in by towering peaks and freezing altitudes. When population grows in closed systems, land becomes the ultimate resource. Scarcity triggers warfare between villages fighting for arable land. Because losers cannot flee over mountains or deserts, they must submit to conquerors, trading freedom for survival to form a hierarchical state. The modern state took shape within these geographic traps. For the first stratified societies, submitting to an elite served as a survival strategy, the only alternative to total annihilation. These environmental theories provide a compelling, intuitive narrative, yet modern anthropologists have identified significant evidence that challenges this strictly deterministic view of history. Archaeological research in China and Mesopotamia shows that centralized state structures often existed centuries before the large-scale canal networks were built. In many cases, it was the state that created the irrigation, not the irrigation that created the state. New Guinea presents an even deeper paradox. The highland valleys are some of the most circumscribed agricultural regions on Earth, yet the populations there never developed centralized indigenous states. Beyond these historical gaps, the 18th and 19th centuries saw environmental determinism turn into a potent political weapon. Thinkers like Immanuel Kant, Ellen Churchill Semple, and Friedrich Ratzel used geography to categorize cultures. They claimed that temperate climates fostered industriousness, while equatorial heat made populations inherently lazy and inferior. These pseudo-scientific theories provided the intellectual cover for racism, slavery, and European colonialism, framing conquest as a natural consequence of geography rather than a choice of power. Most modern scholars have replaced strict determinism with environmental possibilism. Geography sets the stage. It creates limits, exerts pressures, and dictates the available resources. But it is human agency and innovation that actually write the script of history. While our political borders are drawn by humans, the foundational DNA of the state, our bureaucracies, our militaries, and our systems of control, remain the evolutionary scars of our ancestors surviving the Earth.